They called it MacArthur's masterstroke, a brilliant amphibious assault that changed the course of the Korean War. Textbook operation, they say. Military genius. From where I was standing, knee-deep in blood and seawater, it just felt like dying. Frank Kowalski, Staff Sergeant, 1st Marine Division, 5th Marines. I hit the beach at Inchon on September 15th, 1950. 22 years ago now. But I remember every second like it was yesterday, like it's still happening, like I'm still there. I'm from Detroit, Polish neighborhood, working-class family. My old man worked at the Ford plant, came home every night smelling like motor oil and sweat. Wanted me to follow him into the factory. Good union job, steady pay, retire with a pension. Safe. I joined the Marines instead. Summer of 1948, 2 years after the big war ended. Peacetime military. I figured I'd do my 4 years, get the GI Bill, maybe go to college. See the world a little. Do something different than standing on an assembly line for 40 years. Then Korea happened, June 25th, 1950. North Korea invaded the South. I was stationed at Camp Pendleton when the news came through. We all figured it'd be over quick. We were Americans. We'd just won the biggest war in history. We'd roll up some backwoods communist army in a few weeks and be home by Christmas. You ever notice how it's always home by Christmas? We never learn. They activated the 1st Marine Division in July. We trained for maybe 6 weeks. Amphibious assault, urban combat, cold weather operations. Crammed years of preparation into a month and a half because MacArthur wanted his landing, and he wanted it now. Inchon, port city on Korea's west coast, high tides, narrow channels, mud flats that would trap landing craft if the timing was wrong. Every military expert said it was impossible. The tides only aligned twice a month. The seawalls were 15 feet high. The approaches were heavily defended. MacArthur didn't care. He wanted to cut off the North Korean supply lines, trap their army in the south, end the war with one bold stroke. And what MacArthur wanted, MacArthur got. We loaded onto transports in Japan. Hundreds of ships, thousands of Marines, sailing toward a landing that had maybe a 50-50 chance of success. The Navy guys were nervous. They had to navigate treacherous channels at exactly the right tide. Too early or too late, and we'd be sitting ducks. We were nervous, too. Sitting in the hold of a transport ship, checking weapons, writing letters home we hoped we wouldn't need. My squad was mostly veterans, guys who'd fought in the Pacific during the big war. They'd seen Tarawa, Peleliu, Iwo Jima. They knew what an opposed amphibious landing looked like. "This is going to be bad," my squad leader said. Staff Sergeant Chen, Chinese-American from San Francisco, had a Purple Heart from Okinawa. Worse than the islands, at least there we had naval gunfire prep for days. Here we've got, 90 minutes? He was right. We had 90 minutes of naval bombardment before we hit the beach. 90 minutes to suppress defenses that had been preparing for weeks. The night before the landing, I couldn't sleep. Lay in my rack listening to the ship's engines, the sound of the ocean, men snoring and whispering prayers. Thought about my parents, about Detroit, about whether I'd ever see them again. Wondered if joining the Marines had been the stupidest decision of my life. Turns out it was. We hit the beach at 17:30 hours, H hour for Red Beach. The second wave, first wave, was already ashore, supposedly securing the seawall. The Navy had been shelling the beach for 90 minutes. The flyboys had strafed and bombed. Everything was supposed to be softened up. Nobody told the North Koreans. I was in an LCVP, landing craft, vehicle, personnel. 40 of us crammed in like sardines, loaded down with gear, rifles, ammunition, rations. The boat was pitching in the waves, spray coming over the ramp. Guys were throwing up, the smell of vomit mixed with diesel fuel and fear. The coxswain was yelling over the engine noise, 30 seconds! I gripped my M1, tried to breathe, tried not to think about the 15-foot seawall we'd have to scale under fire. Tried not to think about Chen telling me that half of us wouldn't make it off the beach. 10 seconds. The ramp dropped, and hell opened up. Machine gun fire immediately. Tracers ripping through the air, slamming into the ramp, into the water, into bodies. The Marines in front of me went down, just collapsed in the shallow water. Blood everywhere, screaming, "Move! Move! Get off the goddamn boat!" I jumped over the ramp into chest-deep water. Cold. So cold it took my breath away. The weight of my gear trying to drag me under. Rounds hitting the water around me, making these weird slapping sounds. I waded forward, couldn't see through the spray and smoke, couldn't hear anything but gunfire and screaming. The Marine next to me jerked and went under, didn't come back up. The beach was chaos, bodies in the surf, destroyed landing craft burning, the sea wall looming ahead, 15 feet of concrete, North Korean soldiers firing down at us from the top. I made it to the wall, pressed against it, trying to make myself small. Chen was there, already setting up a ladder. Up, go. Marines were climbing. Some made it. Some got shot off the ladder and fell back into the crowd below. I waited my turn. Watched a kid from Ohio, couldn't remember his name, get hit halfway up. He just let go, fell backwards, landed on the rocks at the base of the wall, didn't move. My turn. I grabbed the ladder, started climbing. Hands shaking, legs shaking, every rung expecting a bullet. Halfway up, something hit the wall next to my head. Concrete fragments tore into my face, blood running into my eye. Couldn't see, couldn't stop, just kept climbing. I reached the top, rolled over the wall, landing on dirt and rubble, gunfire everywhere. A North Korean soldier, maybe 10 feet away, aiming at me. I shot him first. Don't remember doing it. Just muscle memory from training. Center mass. He went down. Chen pulled me to my feet. Move inland. We need to get off this beach. We ran through the burning streets of Inchon, buildings on fire, dead civilians, dead Marines, dead North Koreans. The city was a battlefield, and we were just trying to survive. The fighting in Inchon lasted 3 days. 3 days of house-to-house combat, clearing buildings, hunting North Korean soldiers through rubble and ruins. Every room could have an enemy waiting. Every corner could be your last. We lost Chen on the 2nd day. Sniper got him while we were crossing a street. Clean shot through the neck. He was dead before we could drag him to cover. I was squad leader after that. 22 years old, in combat for 2 days, now responsible for 8 other Marines. 8 guys looking to me for orders, for leadership, for decisions that would keep them alive. I had no idea what I was doing. We cleared a building near the waterfront. Old warehouse, 3 stories, reports of North Korean soldiers inside. Standard procedure, grenade through the door, wait for the blast, rush in shooting. I threw the grenade. We rushed in. There were civilians inside, women and children hiding from the fighting. The grenade had landed right in the middle of them. I can still see it, still hear the screaming, still smell the smoke and blood, still see the little girl, couldn't have been more than 5, looking up at me with half her face gone. We called for a medic, but there was nothing to do. They were already dead or dying, and we couldn't stay, had to keep moving, had to clear the building, had to complete the mission. We left them there, stepped over their bodies and kept fighting. Nobody talked about it. Not then, not later. Just another terrible thing that happened in war. Collateral damage, unavoidable tragedy, the cost of victory. I threw that grenade. I killed those people. By the 3rd day, we'd secured most of Inchon. The North Korean defenders were dead or captured or fled. MacArthur came ashore for a photo op, walking through the ruins like a conquering hero. Reporters everywhere, taking pictures, writing stories about the brilliant assault. They didn't photograph the dead Marines on the beach, didn't photograph the civilian casualties, didn't photograph the Marines like me who couldn't stop their hands from shaking, who couldn't sleep, Who kept seeing that little girl's face? We pushed inland. Seoul was next, the capital, heavily defended, street fighting that made Inchon look like a warm-up. We fought through September into October, lost more guys. I stopped learning the replacements' names. What was the point? They'd be dead in a week anyway. We took Seoul on September 25th. Another victory. Another photo op for MacArthur. Another city destroyed. Another few hundred Marines dead. But we'd won, right? We'd accomplished the mission. Cut off the North Korean supply lines, trapped their army, turned the tide of the war. MacArthur's masterstroke had worked. Didn't feel like winning. Felt like surviving. Barely. And it wasn't over. The Chinese came in November. Suddenly, we weren't fighting North Koreans anymore. We were fighting 1 million Chinese soldiers pouring across the Yalu River. The war we thought we'd won was starting all over again. We fought through the winter, the Chosan Reservoir. 20 below zero, Chinese human wave attacks. Marines dying from cold as much as from bullets. I made it through. Don't know how. Don't know why me instead of Chen or the kid from Ohio or any of the others. The war turned into a stalemate. The front lines froze somewhere around the 38th parallel. Neither side strong enough to win, neither side willing to quit. Just endless fighting over hills and ridges that had no names, no strategic value, no meaning beyond the blood spilled for them. I made it through my deployment, 13 months in Korea. Came home in November 1951 with a Purple Heart, a Bronze Star, and nothing else. No parades, no ticker tape, no grateful nation welcoming us home. Nobody cared about Korea. The big war was over. That was the real war, the important war. Korea was just a police action, a footnote, something happening far away that didn't really matter. The guys coming home from Korea weren't heroes. We were just guys who'd done a job nobody wanted to think about. I tried to go back to Detroit, back to my old neighborhood, my old life, but nothing fit anymore. The city looked the same but felt foreign. My parents were happy to see me but didn't know what to say. My old friends wanted to hear war stories, exciting ones, heroic ones. They didn't want to hear about grenades in warehouses or freezing to death at Chosin or watching your squad leader bleed out in a Korean street. I couldn't sleep, couldn't keep a job, couldn't have a normal conversation without my mind wandering back to Inchon, to Seoul, to those 3 days of hell that were supposed to be MacArthur's masterstroke. I got married in '53 to a girl from the neighborhood who I'd known in high school. Betty, sweet girl, patient, thought she could help me. We had 2 kids. I tried to be a good husband, a good father. Tried to hold down jobs, factory work, construction, whatever I could find. But I was still in Korea, still climbing that seawall, still throwing that grenade, still seeing that little girl's face. I started drinking in the late 50s. Not a lot at first, just a beer or 2 to help me sleep. Then more. Then it wasn't about sleep anymore. It was about not feeling, not remembering, not being present for a life I couldn't fully live anyway. Lost my job in '62. Betty left in '64, took the kids. Can't blame her. I wasn't a husband, wasn't a father. I was a ghost of a Marine who'd died in Inchon and didn't know it yet. The VA tried to help, gave me pills, sent me to group therapy with other vets. Some of them were from Korea. Most were from the big war. They all had the same look, that 1,000-yard stare, that emptiness behind the eyes. We didn't talk much in those sessions. What was there to say? We'd all seen things we couldn't unsee, done things we couldn't undo. Come home to a country that didn't understand and didn't want to. The therapist called it combat fatigue, shell shock, post-traumatic stress. Fancy words for the same simple truth. War breaks you. Breaks something essential inside, something you can't get back no matter how many pills you take or how many therapy sessions you sit through. Some guys from my unit stayed in touch. Christmas cards, occasional phone calls. 2 of them killed themselves. 1 in 58, 1 in 67. Nobody talked about why. Everyone knew why. The worst part came in 68. The Tet Offensive in Vietnam. Suddenly war was on TV every night. Body counts, bombing footage, Marines fighting in cities just like we'd fought in Inchon and Seoul. And there was MacArthur, long dead by then, but his legacy everywhere. Books calling him a genius. Historians praising the Inchon landing as one of the great military operations in history. Perfect planning, perfect execution, perfect victory. Nobody mentioned the Marines who drowned in the surf. Nobody mentioned the civilians we killed. Nobody mentioned that the war dragged on for 3 more years after MacArthur's masterstroke, that 50,000 Americans died, that Korea's still divided 20 years later. Nobody mentioned that we didn't really win anything. I started having panic attacks watching the Vietnam footage, seeing those Marines in Hue City fighting house to house just like we did, knowing they were going through the same hell, knowing they'd come home to the same silence, the same indifference, the same broken sleep and broken minds. I wrote letters to my congressman, to the president, tried to tell them what war really does, tried to make them understand that you don't send boys to fight unless you absolutely have to, that every war creates more men like me, ghosts who survived the dying but not the living. Nobody wrote back. I was living in a VA housing facility by then, divorced, estranged from my kids, barely keeping it together. My days were therapy sessions and medication and sitting in a room with other broken men, all of us trying to figure out how to exist in a world that had moved on without us. Met a guy there named Thompson. Vietnam vet, Marine, had been at Khe Sanh, 22 years old, same age I'd been at Inchon. He had the same look Chen had, the same look that kid from Ohio had right before he died on the ladder, the look that said he was already gone. "Does it get better?" he asked me one night. "The nightmares, the memories, all of it. Does it ever get better?" I wanted to lie, wanted to give him hope, tell him that time heals, that he'd adjust, that life would eventually feel normal again. But I'd spent 20 years waiting for it to get better. 20 years, and I was still climbing that seawall, still throwing that grenade, still watching Chen die. "I don't know," I told him. "I'll let you know if I find out." He killed himself 2 weeks later, hanged himself in his room. I found him, just like I'd found Chen, just like I'd found the kid from Ohio, just like I'd found all the others who didn't make it. Except Thompson made it home, survived the war, and then died anyway, killed by memories that wouldn't let him go. That's when I understood. We didn't come home from Inchon, from Seoul, from Chosin, from any of it. We're still there. We'll always be there. The war never ends. It just gets quieter. I'm 64 years old now. Been 22 years since Inchon, longer than I lived before the war. My entire adult life has been shaped by 3 days on a Korean beach, by decisions made in Washington and Tokyo by men who never climbed a ladder under fire. My kids are grown. I don't see them much. They have their own lives, their own families. I'm just the broken father who drank too much and couldn't hold it together. Can't blame them for keeping their distance. Betty remarried. Good guy, I hope. Someone who can be present for her in ways I never could. I'm happy for her. She deserves better than what I gave her. I still go to the VA, still take the pills, still sit in group therapy with other vets. Vietnam guys mostly now, young men with old eyes, telling the same stories we told about Korea, that the WW2 guys told about their war. Different countries, different enemies, same nightmares. Sometimes people ask me about Inchon. They've read the histories, seen the documentaries, want to hear about MacArthur's genius, about the daring landing, about American military might. I tell them it was a successful operation, that we accomplished our objectives, that the landing turned the tide of the war. All true, all lies. The real truth? 3 Marines from my squad drowned when our landing craft hit a submerged obstacle and capsized. They were weighted down with gear, sank like stones, were never recovered. Their families got telegrams saying they died in combat. Sounds more noble than drowned in the surf before reaching the beach. The real truth? I killed a 5-year-old girl with a grenade because I didn't check what was in that warehouse. Killed her and her mother and her grandmother and 3 other civilians who were just trying to survive. The real truth? Chen died in my arms, choking on his own blood, asking me to write to his wife. I never did, couldn't find the words. What do you say? Your husband died securing a street corner in a war nobody cares about, in a country most Americans can't find on a map for reasons I still don't understand. The real truth? I've been dead since September 15th, 1950. The person I was before Inchon, the kid from Detroit who thought war was adventure, who thought Marines were heroes, he died on that beach. What came back was something else, something broken, something that looks human but isn't, not really. They call me a veteran, call me a survivor, call my generation forgotten because we fought between the big war and Vietnam, because Korea gets overlooked in the history books. We're not forgotten, we're just inconvenient. We remind people that there's no such thing as a good war, that even the successful operations leave behind bodies and trauma and men who can't ever really come home. MacArthur got his victory at Inchon, got his parade, his glory, his place in history. The rest of us got nightmares and broken marriages and lives we can't fully live. 22 years ago, I climbed a seawall in Inchon under enemy fire, watched friends die, killed enemies, killed innocents, did my duty as a United States Marine. I'm still climbing that wall, still seeing Chen fall, still hearing that little girl's screams, still knee-deep in blood and seawater trying to reach a shore that keeps receding. The war in Korea ended in 1953. Armistice signed, fighting stopped, prisoners exchanged. Everyone went home, except we didn't. Not really. You don't come home from war. You just stop being there physically. The rest of you, the important parts, the parts that made you human, those parts stay behind, buried in Korean mud, frozen at Chosin, scattered on the beaches at Inchon. I live in Detroit now, same city I left in 1948. But I'm not here. Not really. I'm still there, still 22 years old, still climbing that ladder, still dying on a beach that history calls a masterstroke, still wondering why I survived when so many others didn't, still wishing I hadn't.